last year was big on two celebratory occasions, the Jubilee and the Olympics. 2014-18 will offer something altogether rather more sombre. It will offer commemoration, it will offer reflection. The nature of our intended commemoration was outlined by the Prime Minister on the 11th of October at the Imperial War Museum. And for anybody who hasn't got a copy of that speech, if I may, I'll commend it to you. It's available online and gives the bare structure, the bare bones, if you will, of how the government thinks this should proceed. In the time available to me, I would like to give some sense of that and to say what I think the role of historians and teachers is. Now, if we are equipped with our wonderful retrospectoscope, it may seem to us that the Great War offends all reason. It could be seen as a cataclysmic political failure and an indictment of rulers and government. Truly, if Europe's politicians and potentates in the long hot summer of 1914 had been given advanced sight of the butcher's bill, they would have surely balked at the price. All the more so if they had known the little pre-Christmas shakedown many had envisaged wouldn't in fact conclude until August 1945, and only then with the most unimaginable horror perpetrated not on soldiers in the field, but on the civilians of two cities on the other side of the world. The novelist Pat Barker, whose evocative Regeneration trilogy displays the mental and physical consequences of the Western Front, proposed at last year's Cheltenham Festival two terrible intertwined events as being beyond history, that will never be history because we live with them and their consequences every day of our lives, whether we realize it or not. They are the Holocaust and the Great War. But in their place, would the current occupants of Britain's corridors of power have acted differently to the government of the summer of 1914, as the metaphorical lamps went out across Europe and as a small neighbouring state was overrun? The depressing thing is, I very much doubt it. In this school, with all its history, the concept and costs of the just war in the terms of St. Augustine and Thomas Aquinas will be perfectly well understood. It is important to be explicit about why we're commemorating 4 years of war. Britain has a tradition of celebrating the end of conflict rather than its beginning or the bit in between, a well-trodden path facilitated by a habit of victory. But the sheer scale of 1914-18 and British public sentiment demand a special approach. In a cynical age, there are those, a vocal, articulate minority, who would say that we should move on, that raking over the coals of the past does no good, and that what matters is the hedonism of the here and now. But I need not tell this audience that unless we have a grasp of the past, we will not understand the present or be able to spot the warning signs in political and societal behaviour in time to deal with them. And to dismiss the centenary of the war to end all wars would, in my view, breach the military covenant and would be a gross betrayal of our duty to remember. To see our often maligned British youth gazing out over row upon row of headstones of people their own age at places like Tyne Cot is to recalibrate one's prejudices. Whilst a detailed exposition of the Schlieffen Plan, so important to their GCSE success, may leave them cold, they get the guts of it, they get the sheer rawness of it, and they get why it matters to them. It is clear that each country will emerge with a very different way of marking 1914-18 that respects its traditions, the different perceptions it has of the Great War, and the legacy it seeks. The question is, what will Britain do? In his Imperial War Museum speech, David Cameron gave a very personal account of why the centenary matters to him. But he knows that rhetoric, however heartfelt, however eloquent, is no substitute for action. I submit that his announcement of more than 10 million in public funds for the Imperial War Museum's Centenary transformation and for World War I educational and cultural projects, where money is so very tight, is indicative of real commitment. Key centenaries will bring us together as a nation with our partners, and especially the Commonwealth. The 4th of August 1914 and the British Empire's entry into the war. Gallipoli, Jutland, the first day of the Somme, Passchendaele, and into the endgame, the breakout from the stalemate of trench warfare in the summer of 1918 towards the zenith and closure, the day on which we can at least allow a little commemoration to accrue to allow our commemoration to accrue the appurtenances of celebration on Sunday, the 11th of November 2018. The Prime Minister made clear that his government's focus will be remembrance and that its medium will be youth and education. But it's important to understand that the government's role is that of facilitator, not historiographer. Let us be clear on the role of government. Like no other, our country enjoys a plethora of voluntary organisations, non-governmental institutions, and arm's-length bodies. Our learned and scholastic institutions are particularly well placed to lead the international interest there will be at top end. Some of their plans for 2014-18 are already well advanced. They are impressive and will ultimately succeed, partly because they are independent of Whitehall. In commemorating the pivotal event of our age, central government must provide leadership and encouragement. It must facilitate and coordinate, but it must not dictate. Examination and presentation of the facts in our civil society is the work of historians and educators. It is your work, not mine. I submit that the centenary offers opportunity for historians and their students to explore the counterintuitive, to challenge publicly held orthodoxy, and to discover aspects of the conflict that remain obscure or contentious. Pat Barker hints at this. Sarah Lum, her anti-hero's Geordie girlfriend, is a munitions worker, a munitionette. She's delighted the war has bumped her wages from 10 bob a week to 50, and that she's been able to quit domestic servitude, but she's less pleased to find that trinitrotoluene has turned her skin yellow. Major conflict invariably ushers in major societal change. The Great War changed the role of women dramatically, offering work and status beyond domestic service and qualified suffrage through the Fourth Reform Bill of February 1918. The spur was supply and demand, just as it had been when the Black Death raised bargaining power of the surviving landless poor. Most people have heard of the Second World War Blitz on the East End, but few know about the bombs that fell on the children of Poplar in 1917 and the deaths at North Street School, a bitter foretaste of Britain's total war experience. Now, the centenary will undoubtedly hinge on personal or parochial stories like these. Your communities and your schools will all have their own. There will be men and women, many of them tragically young, whose acts will be celebrated and explored. A favourite of mine is Eastender Jack Boy Cornwall, who at Jutland won Britain's highest award for gallantry in the field and lost his life. He was just 16. Minorities also served and died, but their story is seldom heard. The centenary is an opportunity to put this right, even where the history is uncomfortable, as it has been quite recently in connection with those shot at dawn. The governments of undivided India and South Africa in particular, along with members of ethnic minorities at home, will expect the UK not to spare its blushes in its handling of challenging and nuanced history. Dr. Selden, ladies and gentlemen, can I finish my remarks by encouraging you to keep an eye out for the government's announcement over the next few days about its educational package around the Great War. I hope you'll find it exciting, both in the maintained and independent sectors. There is no doubt that young people are greatly inspired by visits to the battlefields and cemeteries of the Western Front. I would urge you, however, to understand that it is not just about the Western Front. This conflict is much greater than that. Those of us in this country have a particular mind to the Commonwealth, and the Commonwealth will play a very large part in our centenary commemoration. For this country, it's a world war as well as being a great war, because it was played out internationally, and because international players came to this part of the world to fight alongside people born in this country. And it's very important, I think, in our dialogue that we emphasize that this was truly the First World War as well as being the Great War. That said, visits to the Western Front will form a significant part of the government's effort around education over the next few years, and we will be announcing precisely what that means and the wraparound that goes with that over the next few days. I hope very much that you will find that inspiring and useful, that your students in particular will find it useful, but also that teachers who are engaged in this area will find it positive. Part of the legacy around this is making sure that teachers are able to get what they need in terms of teaching material and understanding on their part so that they continue with this well beyond the end of the 4-year centenary period. You are absolutely central to our centenary commemoration. The torch clearly has to be given to the next generation. They are the custodians of this, and they are very much in your hands. And I look forward over the next few months and years working with you to make sure that our centenary commemoration is both appropriate and also that it instills in our young people a lasting legacy. Thank you very much indeed.